The world has been rapidly changing, forcing humans to take to the safest place, the ocean. Standing on the rig, we could see hordes of people flocking towards us. We tried to stop them, but they knocked us off our feet. With so many desperate souls, we were in trouble. We were all at risk. The ocean was restless. Waves surged against the reinforced pillars of Rig Atlantis with an unrelenting ferocity, each impact sending shudders through the sprawling metallic city. Above, the sky was gray, the sun barely penetrating the thick haze of pollution. Below, the dark waters churned, revealing a glint of fins as sharks patrolled hungrily, waiting for the inevitable. Humanity hadn't chosen the sea. It had been forced upon them. The world they once knew had succumbed to the relentless advance of climate change. Rising temperatures melted the polar ice caps, swallowing entire cities and countries beneath the waves. Coastal regions vanished, leaving billions displaced. Desperation drove humanity to adapt, and they built colossal ocean rigs like Atlantis, towering havens designed to float above the encroaching tides. But these rigs were never meant to house so many for so long. At first, the rigs were symbols of hope. They offered a chance to rebuild, to survive. But as years turned to decades and the ocean continued to rise, the rigs became overcrowded prisons. Resources dwindled, disease spread, and tension simmered. Atlantis, once a marvel of engineering, was now a crumbling sanctuary teetering on the brink of collapse. Inside the rig, you could smell the stench of sweat, rust, and sickness. Overcrowded and resource-starved, Atlantis was a pressure cooker on the brink of explosion. Families packed into claustrophobic quarters, the walls smeared with mold and desperation. Food rationing had become more severe, and the water purification systems strained under the weight of so many lives. Disease spread like wildfire, the infirmary overflowing with pale, thin figures coughing into bloodied rags. At the helm of this fragile empire was Conrad Voss. The leader of Atlantis was a broad-shouldered man with steel-gray hair and a gaze that could cut glass. He sat at the head of the council chamber, a makeshift throne room cobbled together from scavenged materials. Around him, the other council members murmured anxiously. "Another riot broke out in Sector 5, reported Jonah, the rig's head of security, his voice tight with exhaustion. "They're demanding more rations. We barely held them back." Conrad leaned forward, his fingers steepled. "And the water filtration?" "Faltering," Jonah admitted. "We need replacement parts, but our last supply run didn't yield enough. If it fails completely..." "It won't," Conrad said firmly, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. "We'll find a way." His wife Maren stood silently by the window, her slender frame framed against the roiling sea. Her hand rested protectively on their daughter Eliza's shoulder. At 17, Eliza was already hardened by rig life, her wide eyes shadowed with the weight of survival. "People are going to turn on us," Maren said, her voice barely audible over the groaning of the rig. "If the riots continue, they'll blame you." Conrad's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. Leadership was a fragile mantle, and on Atlantis, it was as slippery as the ocean spray. The storm hit in the dead of night. Conrad jolted awake to the howl of wind and the metallic creak of the rig straining against the waves. An alarm blared its shrill cry, slicing through the cacophony. He sprang from his bed, Maren and Eliza close behind him as they rushed to the control deck. The rig swayed violently, the floor tilting as if the entire structure might collapse into the abyss. Through the rain-streaked windows, the ocean was a chaos of whitecaps and shadows. Lightning illuminated the water, revealing the sleek shapes of sharks circling hungrily. "Report!" Conrad shouted, gripping a console to steady himself. Jonah's voice crackled through the intercom. "We've lost 3 pillars. Sector 5 is flooding. We need to evacuate those people now." Panic surged through the rig. Families scrambled to higher levels, clutching children and meager belongings. The screams of the desperate echoed through the corridors, mingling with the thunderous roar of the storm. Conrad's heart pounded as he barked orders, trying to maintain some control. But then came the moment everyone feared. A section of the rig collapsed with a deafening groan, sending dozens plummeting into the water. The lucky ones were killed on impact. The unlucky ones. The sharks moved in a frenzy, the water turning crimson as the predators fed. From the control deck, Eliza watched, her face pale and stricken. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We have to help them." Conrad's throat tightened. "We can't," he said hoarsely. "It's too dangerous." Eliza's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, understanding the grim reality. Below, the screams of the drowning faded, replaced by the silence of the sea. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving Atlantis battered but standing. The survivors gathered in the central atrium, their faces haggard and hollow. You could feel their grief and anger. "We've lost too many," Jonas said grimly. "Sector 5 is gone. Over 100 people." He didn't finish the sentence. Conrad surveyed the crowd, his stomach churning. Families clung to one another, their eyes filled with despair. Whispers of dissent rippled through the assembly. "This is on you, Voss," a man shouted, stepping forward. "You failed us." Others joined in, their voices rising in a tide of fury. Conrad raised his hands, trying to calm them. "I'm doing everything I can," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "It's not enough," the man snarled. "Our children are dying. Our families are starving. We need a new leader." The crowd surged, and for a moment Conrad thought they might tear him apart. But then Maren stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. "Enough!" she shouted. "We're all fighting to survive here. If we turn on each other, none of us will make it." The crowd hesitated, her words striking a chord. Conrad seized the moment. "We've survived this long because we've worked together," he said. "If we stay united, we can rebuild. But if we let fear and anger divide us, the ocean will swallow us whole." Slowly, the tension eased. The crowd dispersed but remained uneasy. Conrad knew the reprieve was temporary. The rig was a powder keg, and it wouldn't take much to ignite it. As night fell, Conrad sat with Maren and Eliza in their quarters, the faint hum of the rig's machinery in the background. "We can't keep living like this," Maren said softly. "Something has to change." Conrad nodded, his mind racing. He didn't have answers, only the grim determination to protect his family at all costs. Outside, the ocean whispered its eternal threat, and they all silently knew that their fight was far from over.